I've been working at night at this old motel for a few months now. The motel exuded an ambiance straight out of a ghost hunting TV show, with its dimly lit corridors, outdated decor, and an eerily quiet atmosphere. Despite never imagining I'd end up here, necessity led me to take the job after my last position fell through. Perched on the edge of a small, nearly forgotten town, the motel was secluded enough that cell service was a rare luxury. Adding to the ominous setting, tonight I was the sole staff member on duty. My shift began at 10 p.m., and earlier that day, the manager had mentioned an unusually large group expected to check in at around 10:30 p.m., a rarity since the motel seldom saw full bookings. Unlike typical roadside motels with external room entries, this one had all rooms accessible only from an interior hallway, enhancing its quaint charm. As I busied myself with the usual tasks, tidying the front desk, checking the register, and preparing key cards, a sense of foreboding took hold. Something about tonight felt distinctly unsettling. By 10:30 p.m., my nerves were taut, my eyes frequently darting to the entrance in anticipation of the group. However, contrary to expectations, only a solitary man entered. He moved towards the desk with a stealthy quietness, his presence almost ghost-like against the backdrop of the faded carpet. Clad in an anachronistic suit and a broad-brimmed hat that obscured much of his face, his appearance was peculiar. The dim lighting barely revealed his eyes, but there was a discernible chill to his demeanor. "I'm here for the check-in," he stated, his voice smooth yet devoid of warmth. I responded cautiously, eyeing him as he stood alone. "You're with the group, correct?" I glanced past him, hoping others would soon follow, but the doorway remained desolately empty. "They'll arrive later," he replied, his smile thin yet unnerving. "No need to worry. I'll handle everything." His assurance did little to alleviate the growing unease that seemed almost palpable in the air. Typically, we require IDs from all guests checking in, but when someone pays upfront with cash, particularly during slow periods, we tend to overlook formalities. "Okay, I'll get you checked in," I said, sliding the key card for room 105 across the desk to him, though a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. "So when are the others supposed to arrive?" "They'll come in due time," he answered, his voice calm as he turned to leave. "Oh, one more thing." He paused, his stride halting as he glanced back at me. His grin seemed to stretch wider, sending a chill down my spine. "I'll need to give you some instructions. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Before I could respond, he vanished down the hallway, his figure slowly swallowed by the shadows under the flickering lights. As I waited, the silence in the lobby grew heavy, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, which now seemed to echo louder than before. 15 minutes slipped by, and the stillness was suddenly pierced by the faint sound of children giggling. My head snapped up, my eyes searching the entrance. Rising from my chair, I peered through the glass doors, but the dim light from the parking lot illuminated nothing. A prickling fear crept up my skin. Maybe some of the guests brought kids, I reasoned, trying to dismiss the eerie feeling, but deep down, I sensed something was amiss. Then abruptly, the man reappeared at the desk, materializing almost from nowhere. I jumped, my heart pounding fiercely against my ribs. "Did I scare you?" he asked, the smirk now fully formed on his lips, his eyes twinkling mischievously under the brim of his hat. I forced a laugh, attempting to mask my discomfort. "No, not really," I lied, striving to maintain a facade of composure. He leaned in closer, his gaze piercing through the dim reception area. "Listen closely," he began, his voice low and serious. "This group I'm with, they're a bit different. There are certain rules you need to follow for the rest of the night." He then produced a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. "Read it," he instructed, watching intently as I took the mysterious list. The eerie intensity in his eyes as he handed me the paper sent shivers down my spine. "Okay," I replied hesitantly, the paper feeling almost too heavy between my fingers. "Pay attention," he added, his gaze lingering unsettlingly on me as he walked away. His head turned until he disappeared into the shadowy hallway. I was left staring after him, mouth dry, feeling thrust into the midst of a sinister game. Trying to shake off the unease, I placed the paper on the counter, carelessly adding it to a stack of other documents, thank you notes, customer requests, the usual clutter I tended to ignore until shift's end. With more pressing tasks at hand, like finalizing the check-in, I refocused on my paperwork, desperate to immerse myself in routine. As minutes slipped by, The quiet was once again shattered by the sound of footsteps echoing from the hallway. I sighed, resigned to the fact that the strange man was the only guest around. "Great," I muttered under my breath, dreading any further peculiar encounters. The footsteps grew louder, nearing, yet abruptly halted just outside my peripheral vision. With the silence stretching, I anticipated him rounding the corner any second, but nothing happened. Time seemed to crawl, and a prickly sense of anxiety surged through me. Perhaps I was being overly cautious, but I needed to verify all was well. Cautiously, I stepped from behind the desk and tiptoed towards the hallway. Heart thumping loudly, I reached the corner and hesitantly peered around. I half expected to find him standing there, yet I was met with nothing but an empty, dimly lit corridor. Confusion and unease coiled tighter in my gut. I was certain I had heard footsteps. Shaking my head, I tried to convince myself it was all in my imagination as I turned back toward the reception. But a sudden halt gripped me as my eyes landed on the desk. My heart stuttered. The piece of paper the man had handed me was now conspicuously placed atop the pile, face up. I froze, staring at it. I distinctly remembered burying it under other documents, yet here it was, as if demanding my attention. With a deep, steadying breath, I approached the desk to finally read what it said. My hand trembled as I reached for the paper, a growing apprehension urging me to finally read its contents. With shaky hands, I unfolded the neatly typed list, my pulse accelerating with each crease I smoothed out. The paper seemed to emanate a faint, chilling presence, almost as if it carried the essence of the unsettling man who had given it to me. Taking a deep breath, I began to read. Guests' rules for the night. Rule 1. If you see any of us standing in the hallway at night, do not acknowledge us. We are there for a reason, and it has nothing to do with you. Rule 2. If you encounter a crying child in the lobby or hallway, do not approach. Simply turn around and hum softly to yourself until you are out of sight. The memory of the faint giggling I'd heard earlier flashed through my mind, causing me to glance around, half expecting to see a child lurking nearby. The lobby remained desolate, fueling the growing unease within me as I continued reading. Rule 3. If you hear multiple voices emanating from a single guest room, do not be alarmed. Speak only when the voice you recognize asks you a direct question. Rule 4. Do not leave the front desk between 1:30 a.m. and 2:00 a.m., even if you hear screams for help or any other reason. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I read the 4th rule. I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. My fingers paused on the paper, hesitant to reveal more of the bizarre commands. The weight of the eerie instructions was too much. I couldn't force myself to continue reading. Feeling as though I was being drawn into an unfolding nightmare, I set the paper aside and shook my head dismissively. There was no way I was going to partake in this twisted game. All I needed was to endure until dawn. I leaned back in my chair, seeking to regain some semblance of calm. I closed my eyes and took several deep, slow breaths, trying to steady my racing heart. It was nearing midnight, and the supposed group had yet to arrive. Perhaps the man was merely concocting an elaborate hoax to unsettle me. I didn't know, nor did I want to dwell on it any longer. I just had to survive the night. As the minutes dragged on, the lobby's silence deepened, becoming oppressively thick. It felt as if the very walls of the motel were bracing themselves, holding in a collective breath, waiting for something or someone to break the quiet. As I fixated on the clock, the unsettling sound of footsteps echoed once more through the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that grew increasingly louder until they halted just outside my line of sight. "Oh no, not again," I muttered, a cold dread seeping through me as my heart thumped wildly. Emerging from the dim hallway was a tall, thin man with an obscured face, partially hidden by some kind of cloth or mask. His limbs appeared unnaturally elongated and his movements were jerky, reminiscent of a marionette. I froze, my thoughts racing in panic. The figure advanced with slow, measured steps, his head tilting slightly as if curiously observing me. Every muscle in my body tensed. "Can I help you?" I stammered, striving to maintain composure. He remained silent, merely staring with an oppressive intensity that seemed to drain the air from the room. Soon, a faint buzzing filled the atmosphere, emanating from his direction. It intensified, burrowing into my ears and vibrating through my skull. Desperate to break the intense eye contact, I glanced down at the desk. My eyes quickly scanned the list of rules, seeking guidance. Rule 5 caught my attention. If a guest stares at you for more than 5 seconds, Close your eyes and count to 5. When you open them, they should be gone. Buzzing grew to a near unbearable pitch. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart racing, and began to count. 1, 2, 3, I whispered, each second stretching endlessly as the eerie noise enveloped me. 4, 5. The buzzing ceased. I cautiously opened my eyes to find the lobby once again empty. Relief washed over me, leaving a wave of lightheadedness in its wake. I leaned heavily against the desk, taking deep, ragged breaths to steady myself. A quick glance at the clock showed it was 1 a.m. Only 30 minutes remained until I had to follow Rule 4, staying at the front desk no matter what I heard. With trembling hands, I picked up the list again, reading further. Rule 6 instructed, should you hear scratching or scraping sounds from under any doors, ignore it. Rule 7 bizarrely stated, when a child guest cries, accept it with a smile. Rule 8 warned, if you hear whispering behind you while at the desk, do not turn around. As I digested the rules, each more unnerving than the last, I braced myself for what the remainder of the night might bring, hoping I could adhere to these mysterious directives. Rule 9, if you notice a guest's reflection in the lobby mirror staring back with a different expression, avert your eyes immediately. The very words sent a tremor through me. Oh God, I whispered, my hands now shaking uncontrollably. This was no joke, no mere prank. Something profoundly unsettling was unfolding, and I was caught right in its sinister embrace. A soft rustling to my left broke the oppressive silence. Turning my head slowly, my heart raced as I caught sight of a small child at the edge of my vision, their face obscured by the hood of a dark sweatshirt. The features were indistinct, just a shadowy outline in the dim light. Tentatively, the child stepped forward, a pale hand outstretched, holding a piece of paper. The image of Rule 7 surged through my mind, prompting me to force a smile despite every instinct screaming for me to flee. Thank you, I said shakily, accepting the drawing. My gaze dropped to the paper, revealing a crude depiction of a faceless man, his features eerily smooth, devoid of eyes, mouth, or nose. A chill coursed down my spine. As if cued by my horror, the child looked up abruptly, the hood falling away to reveal a face as blank and smooth as the drawing, a featureless expanse of skin. I recoiled in shock, tripping over a chair and crashing to the floor. My heart pounded in my ears, silencing any semblance of rational thought. When I dared to look again, the child had vanished. Paralyzed with fear, I sat on the cold floor, the terrifying reality sinking in. I had to escape. Job, rules, none of it mattered anymore. I needed to get out. As I staggered to my feet, intending to flee, I froze. The man who had checked in earlier now stood ominously in the center of the lobby, his grin unnaturally wide. Going somewhere? He taunted, his voice laced with malevolence. Words failed me as I stood trembling, unable to respond. He tilted his head, observing me with a disquieting sense of satisfaction. See, I forgot to tell you the most important rule, he murmured, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Under no circumstances should you leave the motel before sunrise. You may find yourself unable to return. A cold dread enveloped me. Return from where? I managed, my voice a mere whisper. His grin broadened, his eyes shimmering with a strange, unsettling light. That's for you to find out, he answered enigmatically, his back turning towards me as he slowly made his way to the hallway. His gaze held mine until he rounded the corner, leaving me alone with a maelstrom of dread and bewilderment swirling in my mind. A glance at the clock showed it was 1:25 a.m., and I was torn between fleeing into the unknown or staying bound by the rules. My heart urged me to escape, yet my instincts screamed to obey the ominous guidelines. Frozen in place, my deliberation was abruptly shattered by screams, harrowing, visceral screams that reverberated off the walls, assaulting my ears with their intensity. Checking the time, it was now 1:32 a.m. The rule was clear: do not leave the front desk between 1:30 a.m. and 2:00 a.m., no matter what sounds you hear. I gripped the counter, my entire body tensed as the cries intensified, each one more piercing than the last. The chilling howls continued, their raw power echoing through the corridors, growing louder and more frantic by the second. I repeated to myself, "Stay here," my voice barely a whisper as I clenched the desk's edge, my knuckles blanching. I fought the urge to flee, reminding myself of the surreal nature of this place and the gravity of the rules. The screams escalated, morphing from human agony into something far more eerie and animalistic. Closing my eyes, I attempted to shut out the relentless assault on my senses. It felt as though a horde of demons were clawing at the very fabric of my sanity. In the brief silences, the clock's ticking seemed deafening. Another glance at the time, 1:45 a.m., only 15 minutes remained. Doubts plagued me. Could I endure this nightmare? The screams turned to sobs and wails, their tone now imbued with a desperate, haunting sorrow, as if echoing from a soul ensnared in perpetual despair. My hands clenched tightly, nails pressing into flesh as I willed myself to stay rooted at the desk. "Do not leave the front desk," the rule echoed in my head, a mantra against the madness. The unnerving silence settled heavily as I paced the floor, the memories of the screams echoing in my mind, a grim reminder of the night's horrors. The clock's slow progress was torturous, showing 1:50 a.m. as the cries seemed to press against the very walls, threatening to break through into the lobby. I bit my lip hard, the sharp pain a desperate attempt to anchor myself amidst the chaos. The room felt like it was shrinking, the air growing dense with the echoing wails that merged into a discordant symphony of distress. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I endured the relentless noise. By 1:58 a.m., I was counting the seconds, each one a step closer to reprieve. The building itself seemed to react, gradually muffling the sounds as if absorbing them into its structure, the screams becoming a distant echo. The clock's seconds hand inched forward agonizingly, each tick resonating like a hammer in my mind. Finally, 2 a.m. struck and the screaming ceased abruptly. A deep silence enveloped the lobby, so profound it was almost suffocating, leaving a ringing in my ears. I collapsed back into my chair, breathing heavily, heart pounding as if trying to escape my chest. It was over, at least for the moment. The quiet was oppressive, a physical weight that was almost harder to bear than the screams. My gaze flicked to the clock, 2:02 a.m. The rules of this nightmarish game haunted me still, casting long shadows over my thoughts. I drew a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands that left damp prints on the desk surface. The urge to flee was overwhelming, to distance myself from this place and its eerie hold. Yet, the man's warning echoed in my head, a chilling reminder. Under no circumstances should you leave the motel before sunrise. You may find yourself unable to return. Return from where? The thought chilled me to the bone. So, I remained seated, every sense strained for the slightest sound, but only the flickering hum of the struggling fluorescent lights filled the silence. I peered down the dimly lit hallway, half expecting the shadows to coalesce into something tangible. Minutes dragged by, the stillness becoming more daunting than any scream. Noise, at least, gave me something tangible to combat. But this quiet, this void, it gnawed relentlessly at my nerves, feeding the growing terror within. Out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement startled me. Holding my breath, I turned slightly to the left, where a small, eerie figure hovered at the entrance of the hallway. My heart sank. A child. Despite the rising panic, I recalled the rules with stark clarity. Rule 2. If you encounter a crying child in the lobby or hallway, do not approach. Simply turn around and hum softly to yourself until you are out of sight. The child was silent for the moment, its form unnervingly still. Part of me hoped it was merely a guest child involved in a macabre prank. Yet, the chilling reality told me otherwise. The child's head cocked subtly as if trying to get a clearer view of me, assessing my reaction. A chill coursed through me. I knew I had to adhere to the rule without hesitation. Slowly, I averted my gaze back to the front desk, my heart pounding so loudly it filled my ears. Then, breaking the tense silence, a soft whimper echoed through the lobby. The child had started to cry. Compelled by the rules, I began to hum, my voice low and steady, though it felt awkward and strained. I hummed a half-forgotten lullaby, the same one my mother used to soothe my childhood fears. With my eyes fixed firmly on the desk, I resisted the urge to look back. The crying intensified, desperate, as if trying to penetrate my resolve. I hummed louder, my voice shaking with the effort. Everything in me screamed to turn and confront whatever was behind me, but I resisted. "Don't look back," I whispered to myself. "Just don't." As I continued, the crying gradually subsided, dwindling to soft sobs, and then there was silence. I exhaled slowly, allowing myself a moment of shaky relief, and continued humming as I edged toward the safer side of the reception desk, putting the sturdy barrier between myself and the unseen. After a moment, I risked a quick glance down the hallway. It was empty. Relieved, I collapsed into the chair behind the desk, my body quivering from the ordeal. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to collect myself. Though I had adhered to the rule and the immediate threat seemed over, the fleeting sense of relief did little to calm the enduring dread of what might still come. At 2:17 a.m., time seemed to stretch interminably, each second marking its passage like the incessant drip of a leaky faucet. A sudden creak from my right caused me to whirl towards the lobby's old ornate mirror encased in a wooden frame. There, reflected back at me, was my own face, pale and etched with fear, resembling a spectral figure. However, it wasn't just my reflection that captured my attention. Behind me, at the entrance to the hallway, stood a figure, the child again. But this time, its reflection revealed more than before. My breath caught in my throat as I saw its hollow eyes, dark voids that seemed endless, and its mouth twisted into an unnaturally wide grin. Recalling Rule 9, I instantly averted my eyes. If you see a guest's reflection that doesn't match their expression, look away immediately. My heart raced wildly, threatening to burst from my chest as I shut my eyes tight, trying to scrub the chilling image from my memory. The child's grotesque grin and empty gaze seemed to invade my thoughts, spreading like a stain across my mind. I remained still, eyes closed, inhaling deeply, attempting to quell the mounting dread. The air grew chillier, as if the presence had leached the warmth around me. The urge to look again was almost overwhelming, a nagging itch I fought to ignore. "Don't look, just breathe. Let it go," I murmured to myself. Time lost meaning. It could have been minutes or merely seconds. Finally, I cautiously opened my eyes, fixing my gaze firmly on the reception desk. I resisted the temptation to glance at the mirror again. All was quiet except for the soft hum of the lights and my uneven breathing. Allowing a few moments to pass, I slowly looked towards the hallway. It was empty. Turning to survey the lobby, I kept my eyes deliberately away from the mirror. For the moment, it seemed I was safe. My heartbeat began to normalize, the immediate fear receding slightly as I sat there, facing the mundane reality of the reception desk. The night had turned into an ordeal where normal rules didn't seem to apply, each moment unfolding like a scene from a nightmare. For now, the simple, rhythmic sound of my breathing and the quiet hum of the lights above were small comforts in the enveloping darkness. The pervasive sense of dread clung to the room like a persistent fog. Trying to reclaim some semblance of calm, I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath, attempting to anchor myself in the present. A quiet voice in my head questioned, "What am I even doing here? I should just leave, escape while I can." However, the man's cryptic warning echoed in my mind, "You may find yourself unable to return." Was it a genuine threat, or merely a ploy to keep me trapped? My gaze drifted towards the glass doors leading to the parking lot. Freedom seemed tantalizingly close. My car was merely a quick sprint away. I envisioned grabbing my keys, bolting out the door, and driving away within moments. Yet, what did his ominous words mean about being unable to return? My fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the desk. I contemplated leaving, but doubt held me back. Another glance at the clock, 3:00 a.m. I resolved to stay longer, reasoning that if sunrise promised safety, it wasn't worth the risk to leave with only a few hours remaining. As the clock ticked on, each second felt laboriously slow, every tick resonating like a taunt against my frayed nerves. By 3:30 a.m., despite the tension, I started to adapt to the stillness, finding a strange comfort in the routine sounds, the hum of the lights, the rustle of papers, my labored breathing serving as a chant of perseverance. 4:00 a.m., I reassured myself with the continuity of these small, familiar sounds. By 4:30 a.m., I stood and paced behind the desk, rubbing my arms for warmth against the chill that seemed to deepen, the shadows stretching ominously along the hallway. I focused on the promise of dawn, telling myself to just hang on. When 5:00 a.m. arrived, I allowed a tentative sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. A subtle shift in the atmosphere made the air tense, almost palpable with foreboding. Turning towards the hallway, my stomach tightened in apprehension. The shadows there stirred slightly, and then, emerging into the dim light, figures appeared. The hallway filled with silent, static figures, men, women, children, grouped together, all facing in my direction, yet disturbingly motionless. As the silent figures lined the hallway, my heart pounded fiercely, recalling the first rule vividly. If you see any of us standing in the hallway at night, do not acknowledge us. We are there for a reason, and it has nothing to do with you. With deliberate effort, I wrenched my gaze forward, focusing intently on the reception desk, refusing to meet their stares. My fingers clenched the counter's edge, my knuckles bleaching from the pressure. The presence of the figures was palpable, a heavy, oppressive force that seemed to coax me to glance their way, to break the rule and acknowledge them. Time stretched painfully long as I caught the subtle rustle of their garments, the barely audible whisper of their breathing. Every instinct urged me to flee, to react, but I anchored myself to the spot, eyes fixed ahead, relying on the slim hope that ignoring them would ensure my safety. A subtle shift in the corner of my eye signaled one of them moving closer. My body tensed, breath catching as the silhouette of a shadow flickered at my periphery. I clenched my eyes shut, heart thundering, muscles rigid with fear. Then a whisper floated through the air, gentle yet chilling, like the rustle of dry leaves. "Look at us," it beckoned, a hiss almost lost in the stillness. "See what you've ignored?" I bit down on my lip, the sharp pain a reminder to hold firm. I must not acknowledge them, the rule echoed in my mind, but the temptation nagged at me, a persistent itch in my psyche. The whispers enveloped me, a cold, spectral breeze of voices melding into an eerie chant. Resisting with all my might, I focused on the rhythmic ticking of the clock, channeling all my energy into maintaining my composure. Just one more hour. Gradually, the voices waned, the whispers dissipating as if carried away by a change in the wind. With cautious relief, I slightly opened my eyes, still fixed straight ahead. The hallway appeared empty once more. Relief surged as I exhaled the breath I had been holding, feeling the tension begin to ebb. Glancing at the clock, it read 5:50 a.m., just 10 more minutes. I took a slow, measured breath, vigilant not to lower my guard too soon. My gaze unintentionally caught my reflection in the lobby mirror. My appearance was worn, eyes bloodshot, hair unkempt, yet a flicker of hope shone in my eyes. The end was near. As the clock finally struck 6 a.m., I allowed myself a moment to believe I might just make it through. As the first hints of dawn cast a soft light through the glass doors, a sense of relief washed over me. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the lobby all night began to dissipate with the retreating darkness. With trembling legs, I stood, taking a deep, liberating breath. It was finally over. I had survived the night. I approached the glass doors and pushed them open, welcoming the crisp morning breeze. Stepping out felt like entering a new realm. The motel's parking lot was aglow with the early rays of the sun, the air filled with the chirping of birds and the sight of morning mist rising from the cool earth. Turning for one final look at the lobby, it appeared completely ordinary, devoid of any trace of the night's terrors. It seemed impossible that such ordinary space had hosted such horrors. I grabbed my jacket from behind the counter, let the door close behind me, and walked towards my car. The sunlight kissed my face, its warmth seeping deep into my skin, chasing away the residual cold of fear. Settling into the driver's seat, I started the engine and took one last glance at the motel. For a brief second, I could have sworn I saw a figure, a shadowy outline in one of the windows watching me. I blinked, and it vanished. Dismissing it as a trick of my stressed mind, I drove off, leaving the motel behind. As it disappeared from my rearview mirror, a nervous laugh escaped me. I had made it through the darkest night of my life, but I knew with absolute certainty I would never return.